safe, fair, ethical AI and the guidelines that we were producing. So we have looked hard at the environmental aspects in AI ethics. So data centers consuming huge amounts of power, data center or AI systems using huge amounts of data. Is there a way in which we can minimize the amount of data and power that is used in running AI systems? Is something that we've updated our guidance around this time. And the way in which we did it was, again, to really consult with academia, specialists in social and ethical fields. We consulted with industry as well to get the new set of guidelines that we have today. They're not actually released today. They're going to be released very soon. We're just waiting for the AI Minister's office to update the website accordingly, so that these guidelines can be released. Next slide, please. And here they are. Those are some covers for the documents as they will appear in a couple of days' time, hopefully. On their scope and their alignment, they are still non-mandatory. They concern themselves with the design and the deployment of AI systems. They apply equally to the public and private sector as implementers of AI and as developers of AI. I made this reference earlier to significant decisions. At the moment, the guidelines that we've produced are to be applied around making or informing significant decisions. This applies to individuals or society as a whole, and it includes critical decisions as well. And I think here, to try and put this in a HR context, then you would say that a decision to employ somebody, to select somebody out of a field of potentially thousands of applicants, is one of those critical decisions. It's important that you're able to explain to the other 999 who do not, or who are not successful in that application process, how that decision was made, how the AI was used in the decision-making process, where humans were involved, etc. And underneath, in the middle of the slide, I think there is this important point to make as well. HR is different from finance, is different from defense, is different from lots of other industry sectors. So one of the things that we're clear about with these guidelines is that they're there to be enhanced by sector-specific requirements and principles. And again, HR experts will have very firm views on how AI can and should be applied in their own business. And it's a living document, subject to further reviews and enhancements. And then there are other items coming down the tracks, like an AI seal of approval, which is based around assurance processes and going through those successfully, and then how you procure AI as well from, which is, as I've hopefully already proven, a rapidly changing technology and one that we are not always able to fully understand. Next slide, please. And I think, so these are the principles that we now have, and a very quick tour through these, and then we're finished. So we want to make our AI systems that are explainable, transparent, accountable, fair, privacy preserving. These are the new elements around sustainable and environmentally friendly, but that they are human centered. This is about humans at the end of the day and the outcomes that AI drives for them. Next slide, please. I'll just move quite quickly through these, but these are the sorts of principles and guidance that you'll see in the document itself. So we'll make our AI systems as explainable as is technically possible. There is this black box element to AI systems, the mysterious algorithm, the machine learning model. We can all wrap ourselves up in some quite technical language around this, but it's absolutely clear. I think we should be absolutely clear that the decisions and methodologies of AI systems that have that significant effect on individuals should be as explainable as possible. People need to know how AI systems are operating for them, and it's important that if they have queries about it, that we're providing the channels through which people can make requests or ask for explanations around AI. Next slide, please. And then we go into the guidelines underneath the underneath the principles. So what you're really seeing here is more detailed guidance on the principle. So being able to explain to human beings subjected to these decisions what the most important features in the AI model were, those that had the strongest influence over the decision that was made, and what data was used by the AI system, and what attributes that data contained. And again, the guidance is full of examples. You can see a quick one here about a credit card application and how that algorithm looks at credit history, age, postcode, and being able to understand why if your application was rejected. Just one more example, next slide please, of the principles and the guidelines. This one here is about respecting people's privacy. Again, data privacy, this will intersect with the federal data privacy law. And it builds out on that to account for AI-driven technologies. So making sure that we all have adequate data protection frameworks and the governance around them in place so that AI systems and individuals' privacy requirements, their individual rights, are balanced with that innovation and growth potential for AI. Next slide, please. And again here, this is just the guidance that sits underneath that. So being able to say that your algorithm has been, or your AI system has been tested against privacy impact assessments and other other ongoing tests that make sure that the algorithm continues to behave well as it uses more and more data and more personal information across time. It's important to understand that privacy is preserved and that the algorithm does not change the outcomes for the human being as it learns on more and more data and more sensitive data. Just to come to a close now, I did mention that, sorry, next slide please, and then I think we can go to the final slide. We are thinking about how we move from this non-mandatory guidance in which participation is not compulsory to assurance. So almost having a team of auditors as they would come into your business to test business processes, to look at your finances, to come in and test your AI systems and their operations. And I mentioned the IEEE as one of those sort of gold standard standards bodies. We're thinking about how we work with them to introduce a pilot test in Dubai and the wider United Arab Emirates around these assurance teams, and having them come in and look underneath the hood of your AI system to make sure that it's abiding by the guidance, abiding by the principles that I've been explaining over the course of this presentation. And I think this is what we need to do next, because the guidelines are helpful, but the speed with which this technology is now moving is quite something. I mentioned ChatGPT, but that gap between regulation and assurance, and maybe even like firmer policies, and in the fullness of time, like AI laws, needs to be closed. So I think my closing remark is that there's plenty of issues here for HR professionals, people operating in government more generally, to be alert to, and that alertness needs to revolve around both the incredible gains to be made out of AI, but also managing the risks as well, which we can't ignore. So thank you for listening. My voice is just about okay. Salwa, back to you.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Really informative slides, a lot of information that we've got on the international practices and regulations that are, trying to put a lot of effort into making AI use more ethical when it comes to fairness, accountability, and all of the different principles and guidelines. Thank you. I think if anyone has a question, إذا في أي سؤال, please share your questions through the chat box down on the screen. will find it. Just share your question at the end of the sessions. Inshallah, we will be able to answer them and address them to the to our esteemed speakers. So moving next, now it's SHL's turn, and now we will move to Mohammed Farid. Please, the floor is yours.
Assalamu alaikum, shukran Salwa. Thank you, Andrew. Very informative slides, to be honest, and it will make my life easier, right, on my part as well. So thank you so much for that. David, can you share the slides, please?
If I can be put as the presenter now, I can share the slides. That would be great. Thank you. Perfect.
So till we do that, right? So in 2020, what we're discussing today was a dream to SHL and to FAR, right? We were all locked in the COVID. If you guys all remember those bad days, hopefully they don't come back. And we had an idea. UAE was really focused on AI and actually being one of the best countries in the world in AI. So we had an idea. It was just a crazy idea, I think, at that time. We reached out to our partners, FAR. We've been dealing with them for a long time on other projects. And we discussed, with all that increase in AI, SHL, from our perspective, we see lots of issues with AI globally. There's no regulations, there's no best practices, there's no guidelines, and the increase of AI is using mainly in talent acquisition. So we reached out to FAR and said, why can't we develop together the first, I would say, AI guidelines in talent management, right? And as always, UAE is number one, right? So the UAE government today, I think, is the first government, right, to release such a document, right, to regulate the use of AI, specifically in talent management. David, next, please. Yeah. So our agenda for today, we'll talk about the AI human resource strategy. I know Salwa have touched on that as well as Andrew. I'm going just to summarize. I'm not going to repeat that section because it will be too much. Then we're going to introduce to you who is SHL and what do we do, right? And then we'll talk about talent assessment and what are the benefits and the risks for that in general from a talent assessment, and how AI was infused into talent assessment over the last few years. Because most of you know talent assessments, most of you know psychometric assessments, ability tests, and all of that. But how did AI come into talent assessment? That's the story that we want to talk to you about today as well. Next, David, please. So as we talk today, Salwa have touched base on the AI human resource strategy, but the AI human resource strategy for the federal government is actually it's a smaller piece of the whole AI government, right, strategy for 2031, which was released by the cabinet in 2021, talking about how can we position the UAE as one of the leading countries globally, whether of like building AI or using AI in offering government services. So it's actually both. It's not only about using AI, but about how as well UAE can build the talent and can build the technologies for developing AI in the UAE. David, next, please. So before I go into that, some of you might know SHL, some of you might not know SHL. So let me introduce SHL first. So SHL, we are the leading provider of assessment science and technologies in the world. We have been in the business for around 45 years. We have been in the UAE for the last 15 years, and we do assess more than 40 million people per year, every year. And we've been doing that constantly for the last, I would say, 12 to 15 years. So you can imagine the amount of data that we have. Our solutions, as you can see, are covering between talent acquisition and talent management. So we help organizations with how can they actually get the right talent in, how do they manage the talent, up to succession planning and high potential identification. David, please. So as you can see, lots of solutions from a technology, graduate, volume, professional, managerial leader in the acquisition side, till succession planning, hyper identification, leadership development. So we have the answer for all. And we do that based on data. David. And our solutions are always, as you can see, the most comprehensive studies, and the more we win awards for all our studies, as well as our HR technology is graded as the best in the market. And as you can see, we do empower more than 10,000 customers globally, right, with talent assessment solutions. As you can see, from government to private sector to public sector, to all government sizes and all as well private and public sector size. David? And everything is driven by data, by the way. And that's why AI, we'll talk about AI today. Talent assessment now, or people science, as we call it, is actually based on data. The more data you have, the more it will help you streamline your own processes. Looking at talent acquisition, you need to understand what good looks like. And it's all about having the right data on the right people to understand how can you make a decision. And David, please. So I think that summarizes introduction to SHL, and then I will leave to David to talk to you about talent assessments and objective talent assessment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mohammed. So I'll go through my section now. So to understand really what ethical issues might arise within the field of talent assessment, and when integrating artificial intelligence into it, it's useful to understand what they are and why they're so critical to the talent management processes. So we'll go through this. So the guide itself was really created with clear objectives in mind to help you understand talent assessments, how they're used, what they should look like, and also how to critically evaluate them, especially when they're injected with artificial intelligence. So let's go through and see a summary of the important information, the important concepts you need to consider when looking at artificial intelligence in talent assessment. And the good news is it really clearly aligns with what Andrew said earlier. So the clear objectives then for the guidelines would be: one, to present what best practices would look like in a field of talent assessment and artificial intelligence. So taking the concepts that Andrew mentioned earlier, but really focusing and deep diving into how they're applied in the field of talent assessment, HR and talent assessment. So providing general guidance in their practical application, information about this, but also providing a framework, which is really important, providing a framework to allow you to evaluate systems and technologies that utilize artificial intelligence. To what the point made earlier, what does good look like? Well, in artificial intelligence, clearly there really needs to be some guidelines about what good looks like when using artificial intelligence in talent assessments. Because what the previous speaker said is this sort of technology can affect people's lives. So you need to make sure that everything is above board. So what are talent assessments? Well, some of you would have come across these before, some of you may not. Well, a broad term for them is that they cover the process or activity of assessing key aspects of an applicant's or employee's attributes, be they skills, traits, experience, competency-based. And the wide field of that, of course, is psychometrics, the field of psychologically measuring people's attributes through specific types of technologies, typically questionnaires and tests, etc. So there's an increasing focus then on ensuring a positive candidate experience as well. So that's another field part of talent assessment, making sure that when people do talent assessments or assessments in general, they get a positive experience, because of course that gives you good PR as well. Because if they have a poor candidate experience, well, they'll go and tell people. So how then can you apply artificial intelligence to these to make them effective, accurate, but still have that good candidate experience? Well, why are they used? Let's take a quick look at that. Clearly, with talent assessments, they have to achieve certain levels of attributes, such as reliability of the assessment, meaning if you do the test more than once, you're going to get a similar outcome. Because if you don't, clearly it's not a stable assessment. So there's reliability, but clearly there's also what's called validity, which I'll come back to. Do they actually predict performance? If talent assessments don't predict performance, well, what is the point of having them? Here you can see some meta-analyses of typical types of assessments and their validities in a correlation. So clearly they are very valid, and clearly they can be used in conjunction with one another. So artificial intelligence, when put into talent assessments, still needs to achieve these types of validities, that it does predict performance in the right way. So let's then take a look at artificial intelligence in terms of talent assessment and see how it's applied and what to look for to make sure it's applied properly. Well, first of all, artificial intelligence can be thought of as the exact term can vary across fields actually. But for our purposes, let's think of it here as it's a field of study with the general purpose of developing programs or machines that display properties with similar human levels of intelligence or judgment. That's a nice way to think of artificial intelligence. We're trying to get artificial intelligence to do things that it's good at, looking for patterns in data that could make things more, make things easier for humans. It's there for us. We're not there for it. So subfields of artificial intelligence would be machine learning, which Andrew alluded to in his talk, which involves taking mathematical algorithms and deploying them and adapting them to maximize their prediction of patterns of relationships. Clearly something that could be useful in talent assessments. Machine learning then, as its name implies, it enables computer algorithms to learn from data sets. So it's not specifically programmed, it learns from data sets. And that's why the data itself is absolutely critical to any effective artificial intelligence, and I'll come back to that. But the focal point is then you're training or teaching the computer program through the use of specific training data sets. Another field of AI which is used is called natural language processing, which involves the processing of verbal communication, or natural language, but it also enables then meaning to be conveyed from the words and transformed into data that can be used in the algorithms. So we can take that spoken language, convert it into data that's meaningful to it and helps it to actually predict things as well. You actually probably use this every day without realizing it, because things like Alexa and Siri use machine learning and NLP in combination to give you that realistic sort of interaction when you actually try to talk to it. Excuse me, I tried to change the slide. So what are the potential benefits of such technology? What is the benefit of putting AI into a talent assessment? Well, for better prediction, clearly, because the fact that machine learning and AI in general is so effective at identifying complex patterns in data and can provide an optimal method for scoring candidates' responses and features in a way that can increase the validity and so can result in higher accuracy and predictiveness in terms of the criteria you're trying to measure. Well, clearly that should be a benefit if it's designed in the right way. It can also help reduce bias. AI can learn to mitigate bias from the analysis of candidate data. So if developed in the right way, can reduce the chances of bias occurring. It can also help you in terms of new methods. So there are new methods or techniques and new data available now into talent assessment, of course, so we can have are able to model relationships around audio and visual information now, which we couldn't in the past through the use of or the application of artificial intelligence. I've already mentioned this, but the combined use of natural language processing and machine learning methods enables the spoken word to become part of a talent assessment. And so clearly that can be useful because then you can actually start looking at more realistic assessments where people have not just to do an assessment, but it can be a simulation of a highly realistic simulation of work scenarios. And of course, being more realistic, then that gives that better candidate experience we've talked about as well. So there's many benefits available, again, if used in the right way. So what are the main risks in AI, in talent assessment? And again, some of these concepts were discussed by Andrew, and I'm just focusing on them very specifically to talent assessments. Clearly, data protection, absolutely critical that your data is highly protected because people will lose confidence in them and won't use them. And there are regulations starting. There is a regulation, for instance, in the UAE, the Personal Data Protection Law. And so any AI, when used in talent assessment, really does need to ensure that it adheres to any regulations. And of course, there are other regulations to think of in other countries should you be using the talent assessments in a global fashion, such as GDPR, of course. There's also, of course, bias. And bias occurs when the assessment unfairly discriminates against individuals based on one or more characteristics, race, gender, age, disability, etc. Now, AI should really reduce this, but only if designed correctly with expert oversight, because the consideration of fairness should be really inbuilt into the design process from the very beginning. Computer programs are not anti-discriminatory. You have to make sure they're designed to be so. Of course, there's public relations risks if there's a negative, because obviously if AI is not built carefully, then there's a risk of negative public perceptions. of the organization, and the knock-on effect, of course, could be the quality and quantity of applicants that apply to organizations that get a bad reputation. So talent assessment experts can really help you recognize the features of assessments that create negative reactions and ensure that they're not inbuilt into any assessment you're going to develop. Effectiveness is a critical one. If it doesn't work, then the argument is it shouldn't be used, of course. So actually then effectiveness, or the final risk then, is of using AI that just doesn't do what it claims. And the complexity of AI means that designers may not even know how it works. We'll come back to that. So it's really important that AI and talent assessment can be shown to predict work performance and also give people confidence that when they predict performance, it's going to be accurate. So to help with these risks, SHL have developed 6 key best practices for the use of talent assessments, things to look for, especially when using talent assessments. This is around the data itself. We've talked about data, and Andrew's talked about the importance of the data as well. Transparency, that's another concept, which I'll take you through shortly. Fairness, of course, I've mentioned it already. It's very important, so I'll keep reiterating that. Making sure that everything, any talent assessment using AI is rigorously valid, incorporates human oversight, because humans do need to know that it is working well and that the decisions are effective and meaningful. And of course, disclosing intent, which is about letting the candidates know that AI is going to be incorporated into a process that into which they've applied. So 6 key best practices. And the guideline itself not only talks about these, but does give you a structure and a survey that you can use to look at specifically how effective is the AI talent assessment that is being offered to us by a particular organization. So let's deep dive into some of these areas. So then, how relevant is the training data? There's some concepts to think about here. One is data quality, absolutely critical. Why did the development team include the specific data used to train the algorithm? So what is it about that data they saw as being critical to training the algorithms? So data should be free from error, it should be accurate and relevant to the target audience that's going to be assessed later. So determining the quality of data will depend upon the situation and the type of data used. Then, of course, it's quantity. Assessments or utilizing AI require large amounts of data for its development, and typically larger amounts than traditional assessments, because you're literally training the algorithm. This is especially true then with assessments that don't have any prior scientific literature or predecessors. It's cutting edge. It really needs data to ensure that it's working well. How much data? That really depends on or varies according to the assessment type, the type of data, and the novelty of the assessment. But large amounts of error-free data are critical. Another issue to think about is whether it's representative. Is the data that's being used to train those algorithms representative of the pool of applicants that are likely to apply and be taken through the process which includes this artificially intelligent talent assessment? This could be then that the data needs to include pools of applicants from relevant groups, be they age, gender, region, disability status, lots of different factors to consider here. And of course, the absolutely critical one, is it safe? Is this data safe so that people's data cannot be seen by others inappropriately at a later time? Of course, there is already legislation in place in the UAE, for instance, for this. And of course, you've all heard of the GDPR. So these are the questions to ask of any AI talent assessment developer who offers their services to you. Tell me about the data. Show me the technical manuals. Why did you include this data? Who was included in the data? What did it tell you about, etc., etc. Of course, then we have to go to how does the algorithm make decisions? So this is the transparency concept that was discussed earlier. It's absolutely critical then that any user of an assessment understands how the assessment and the underlying AI works. How does it make decisions? So transparency is an absolutely critical concept in the arena. It means that the developer needs to be able to clearly explain to you how the AI works and how it arrives at decisions. And this will reduce the risk of legal issues later. Now, it may sound obvious, oh, well, of course they're going to be able to tell us how the algorithm works. But actually, there have been cases in the past of developers who've created interesting algorithms that do seem to detect interesting patterns of data, but they literally can't tell you how the algorithm works because it's so complex, they cannot tell you how it came to those outcomes. That could be extremely dangerous in the talent assessment field where they can't explain why it decided something. So transparency is absolutely critical. And of course, is there a rationale for the predictors used? What are the predictors in the assessment? Why did they choose them? And is it likely to provide evidence of validity? And can they show you why those relationships exist? Other things to think about are there may be different predictors or multiple predictors, they're weighted differently. Any developer needs to be able to explain to you how they're weighted, how they're used to come to an overall decision. How do they come to the outcome? It's very important to be able to describe that to you. So how biased are those decisions? So bias, of course, can emerge from language or context that may actually be relatively inaccessible to certain groups. If assessment scores are generated by raters, then raters should really be trained extensively so that the actual data going into the rubrics or the rules of talent assessment aren't biased from the outset. And when developing algorithms to score responses, you need to examine between group differences for evidence of adverse impact. Does the talent assessment actually predict performance better for some groups and not others? Is that going to be an issue in terms of adverse impact? Because even if it is valid, it may only be valid for certain groups. So you really need to ask these questions. These are critical questions because if it's shown that it's biased against certain groups or less people of a certain type of group gets through processes, the whole process will be brought into question. So absolutely critical that they can show you through their studies that there's no significant score differences between groups or protected groups, and that the assessment is equally predictive. Now, an AI assessment is still a talent assessment, so it still has to have rigorous areas that should be investigated. It should have these actual attributes. Does it have content validity? What does that mean? Well, does the assessment itself contain things that are relevant to the target jobs it's been designed to assess? Or it should have content that clearly links back to the roles or the areas of roles that job families that it alludes to be able to assess. So content validity is absolutely critical. Criterion validity we'll come back to shortly, but construct. What is construct validity? Does it measure what it's supposed to measure? If it claims to measure certain criteria or certain constructs, is there anything in the developer's technical manual, or can they show you evidence to show it actually does measure those particular things? Sounds simple, but actually it's critical. Some tests may claim to measure certain things, but measure different things much better. That wouldn't be a particularly effective assessment. So construct validity is critical too. Generally, that type of validity is often checked through the use of other assessments that have measured those types of constructs in the past to see if there's correlations between the newest assessment and previous or predecessor assessments to check there is the correlation there. Finally, criterion validation, which is absolutely critical. I've mentioned it before. Does it actually measure performance? Does it measure some sort of criteria that says that this person will be a good fit for the role, will perform well in the role, they're less likely to leave, etc., etc. So there needs to be clear predictors that it actually does predict, if that makes sense. So again, these types of questions you see on the screen, these are absolutely critical questions to ask any developer when they're providing you with an AI-based talent assessment. How are final decisions made? Obviously you've heard of this in this already, but human oversight is really quite a useful thing to consider here. So algorithms make certain decisions based on the data they have in front of them. But is there any human oversight into how that actually then happens? So the amount of oversight required for AI will vary. On the lowest spectrum, the AI could have complete autonomy for some reason, and that's been deemed to be an acceptable amount of oversight. On the higher end of the spectrum, human oversight is where humans actually combine those AI outcomes or the talent assessment scores or outcomes with other pieces of information they have about candidates. So they have multiple sources of evidence, with the AI talent assessment being one of them. So really, you need to determine how much human oversight is really required for a certain type of assessment based on what it is, based on what it's being used for, and is that really appropriate or not? How much human oversight has there been, and can you still determine that it's useful and an acceptable use of the actual assessment? Final question would be around, if I can move my screen, the candidate, how the candidate's informed. This is really quite important because obviously in certain countries, in certain regions, there are regulations that state that you do have to give them informed consent or ask them for informed consent, and then there are caveats to this. So for instance, in some regulations available, it does say that they are asked for informed consent, but if they don't accept that informed consent, or they refuse, then you have to have an alternative assessment that doesn't use the AI. So dependent on the region, depending on the regulations, this is even more stringent in some areas. So how are the candidates informed? Are they informed of the use of AI? Does the manual describe the degree in terms of which the AI actually informs them? So for instance, you might want to ask the developer to show you screenshots of how the actual assessment informs them of the AI. You might want to ask them to show you the manuals or the other ways that they inform candidates they are going to have AI applied to their responses. Are they informed about how it works? And are there alternative assessments available if they refuse to go ahead with an AI talent assessment? So clearly very important, because candidate experience is critical, but also informed consent is really, really important too, based on the legislations. That really takes us through the 6 key questions or the areas that you would really need to focus on when looking at talent assessment, when injecting AI into it. What I'm going to do now is actually pass you back to Mohammed to show your final slide, where we're actually applying these best practices and techniques with the federal government at the moment.
Thanks, David, and thanks to everyone. Taman, if you have any questions on David, please in the chat as well, right? So we talked about the guidelines, but usually after guidelines, we come to implementation. And that's what we're actually trying to implement as well with Fahad. Currently, we are working on building the first artificial intelligence-powered video interview platform called Forsa with Fahad. The whole point of that will be based on the federal government competencies, and it will be in Arabic, and it will help vastly with talent acquisitions across all the federal government, which means that a candidate applying for a job can actually record the interview. He'll be asked a question, and then the question message will be recorded. Then the AI will listen to it and will give as well some recording. And of course, we're making sure that all the guidelines that David have shared so far will be as well part of the scoring. So we'll make sure that it's responsible, we'll make sure that it's transparent, we'll make sure that it's ethical in the way it's going to use. So this is not only like implementation of another product or platform, but it's about the idea of living the values of responsible AI in a government platform. And thank you so much. Back to you, Salwa.
Thank you, Mohammed. Thank you, David. Very informative. It gave us detailed and brief at the same time description of what will the guide have for the federal government employees. So everybody in the session, كل اللي في السيشن اخواني واخواتي, you can get the guide. تقدرون تحصلون على كوبي من الجايد من موقع الهيئة الإلكتروني. If I can get the share, I can share with you a barcode. You can scan the barcode. You will be able to get the guide in Arabic and in English. Thank you very much. Very informative session, Andrew, Mohammed, and Farid. I think we can go to the questions and answers. Anyone who have a question, please post them in the chat box. أي حد عنده سؤال حطوه في الchat box. So I will start with the questions and answers. Andrew, first of all, you have mentioned Andrew and Muhammad, David, please, you can interfere as well. You have said that AI can remove bias, but it also can create bias, I believe. So how can we resolve this issue? Because bias comes from whatever data we are using to build our AI system. So it is not the AI that's creating the bias, the data is what is creating the bias. So I know that we can develop some tools and algorithms to remove this bias, but we are still creating these biases through AI.
So can I take that one very briefly, and then obviously
like,
join in?
yes.
And so obviously,
Yes.
when it comes to artificial intelligence, data is the king. You need large amounts of data from a representative group. So the first set of data, the training data, needs to be fed to the algorithms to ensure that you get what you'd expect from in terms of the outcomes. Of course, that training data will then give you information to suggest if not only you're getting normal distributions of results, but also that you get those similar distributions in terms of who is in the normal distribution. So it shouldn't show that certain groups get lower scores than others significantly, etc. So the whole point of the training data is to not only train the algorithm, but make sure there are no unintended outcomes. Of course, once the training data has done its job, what we always suggest doing then afterwards is putting another large, unique set of data through, because what the experts tell me in terms of when they do their algorithms is that actually these algorithms tend to do very well with their original data sets, but the key thing is then checking them against unique other data sets to see that they still get the similar outcomes afterwards. So it's not just that data set did this, but it doesn't replicate to other data sets. That should hopefully reduce any chances of any untoward discrimination, because you will be looking for these things and looking for statistics. I can never say this the first time. Statistically significant differences between groups as well, because if there are, then that's an issue. You should see that there shouldn't be statistically significant differences between scores between different protected groups. That's my part of it. Okay.
Thank you, David. So I think another question is that now, Andrew, you wanted to say something, please?
Yes, I did. Sorry, I was just waving to a colleague who passed by, but outside the office. But yeah, I mean, just to add one thing to David's answer, we've been looking at synthetic data within Dubai Digital Authority, and I think this offers something, because everything that David said about the data and its quality and its representativeness holds good, but sometimes you can't use the data because of the privacy aspects of it. When you get into really quite private details about individuals, sometimes it's hard to share that data and to make sure that it can be used to support the development of algorithms. So synthetic data is where you use one of these generative AI models to, if you can identify gaps in data, so where the data doesn't exist, which is itself introducing a bias, or where you think that you need to sort of boost data amongst, let's say, a particular age group or a particular ethnic background, you can generate new data that reflects and maintains all of the statistical attributes of the original data. So it maintains the relationships with other variables in the data set and basically maintains that statistical integrity that you want. That's something that we're looking at the moment. And again, it's another one of these emerging technologies. So it enhances privacy, it generates more data. You can go to businesses who've got their own proprietary synthetic data models. You can go to the internet and find such models on GitHub. So again, we're introducing some guidance about how you can actually start to work with synthetic data. I mean, I don't know whether there is a specific application in human resources to consider, but definitely in a sort of general, broader sense, fraud identification, identifying, sort of making stronger databases for marketing, then the use cases are there.
Sure. Thank you, Andrew, because this is a concern for us, especially the people who are in the HR domain, because you are dealing with people. The sensitivity level goes even higher because any ununderstood decision from an AI system or a machine learning algorithm will have further impacts. It's on the individual, on the group, on the community. So, having these resolved in time is an important factor. We hope that we reach that level where we can resolve that complication. So do you think, do you think as of now it is a good time that we update our, for instance, performance management policies, talent acquisition policies, so we have this informed consensus, David, as you've described it, that we need to have in performance management, for instance, if we apply AI in performance management, that Salwa, you will be appraised based, an AI algorithm will give an initial appraisal for you. Should we add this information as of now in our policies, or it's too early? That we
a very brief one from me. And you should always have a policy in place anyway about how you use talent assessments in an organization. So this should be an extension of policies you should already have in place. So it's an extension of and having an aspect of your policy that talks about how AI is used within an organization, how it is used, how it shouldn't be used, how the information should be used, the decisions that can or can't be made with it, who should have access to it, to the point of security. So there should be, you should already have a policy about how to use psychometrics and talent assessments. This should be an extension of that for sure.
And but if I can add as well to what David has been saying, and back to what Andrew said as well in his slides, when he talked about it has to be a live document, right? The problem is sometimes we put policies and we leave it in the drawer for like 2, 3, 4, 5 years. That doesn't work anymore, right? With the speed of advancement in science and technology, those policies need to be there in a live document to be updated even periodically. Because, we mentioned ChatGPT today, right? ChatGPT, like 3 months ago, not everybody knew it, right? Now everybody knows it. Microsoft bought it, and now we have ChatGPT for Teams that can go in, understand what you're doing, as well send invites to meetings and all of that. All this happened in a period of 3 to 6 months. So what we're saying is you have to have the policy, but you have to make sure it's live policy, not an old policy. And I want to add as well something, because I saw a very small comment as well in the chat from Safia. I think she was saying that HR field, even if we use AI, we need HR professionals. Exactly, we need HR professionals, 100%. And those are the HR professionals who will make sure that we have the right policies, we have the right guidelines to use the technologies to actually help. I mean, AI will not manage the whole business and we're all sitting at home doing nothing. No, AI is here to actually help us by giving us more data insights and more science to actually help us do a better job and focus on more strategic aspects of the job rather than the normal operational aspects.
I think there's something really, really interesting here. I mean, it was me who introduced ChatGPT, and I don't want us to obsess about it unduly, but it just struck me. You can have job applicants sitting at home with ChatGPT applying for jobs or completing application forms, and they could quite literally be inputting into ChatGPT, write me an answer for a recruitment question about a time when I have successfully run a team or managed stakeholders in a difficult environment, and the answer's generated in seconds. And I think that poses really interesting questions for HR professionals about how you identify that and then what you do about it.
Not only that, even Andrew, even for the industry itself, right? Because now as vendors and technology providers, we will need to go out and do some controls over how GPT can help to make sure that the assessment tests and assessment tools are still valid with the context of ChatGPT. So it actually, but that's how things evolve, and that's why policies procedure review of all the content is now even faster than before. And before science was developing like every 5-6 years, now it's evolving in every second. So yeah.
So I think even now it's a good time that we start looking at these, ethical guidelines and principles, because these technologies evolve very quickly. So going back to Sophia's question, she had another question: how do we deal with the skill gaps of current employees? I think she refers to the concept that human resource people need to do a lot also of effort to validate the outputs of such tools.
So Salwa, yeah, on that point, I would just lead, and maybe other colleagues as well will chip in. So usually, to develop a gap, first you have to identify what a gap is, right? Right. Sometimes we think we know what is the gap, but the problem is, unless you have valid data that's telling you what is the gap, we cannot really develop the person to the right gap. So how to identify the gap? You have to look at the potential future of a person based on his skills, competencies, abilities, and then the current state, where he is today. And the difference between the potential and the current is the gap. Based on that difference, right, if the difference is very high, then you have to look into different engagements, because there's lots of engagement to develop: coaching, mentoring, training. There's lots and lots and lots of ways to develop talent, but you have to identify the best way based on the gap, based on actually what you want to focus on, right? Because we all have gaps, right? But it depends on what is our job and what do we intend to do. You have to focus on what's really needed for the job. You cannot develop everybody across everything. It doesn't make any sense. So you have to be focused. So first, you have to identify what good looks like, what do you need to actually work on, and then measure that to see the potential and the current, and then identify the gap, and then based on that, you can develop that gap. That's how it's the best practice when it comes to developing people in the jobs.
I've been thinking about this in a sort of broader technology sense for quite some time now, and I think there's something really interesting about how you work with policy customers, so policymakers in government, or you work with like business units and delivery units in government, so that they understand and work with the technology. I mean, because there's a clear and maybe even a broadening gap between technologists and what technology can do and the groups that I've just mentioned. But it's absolutely critical that you're able to build in those groups, the policymakers, the delivery managers, a basic degree of technology literacy, so they can understand the main attributes of the technology and how that technology can then be applied in their lines of business. And this is just about getting them to ask intelligent questions, within the guidelines, the frameworks that we've all been talking about today. And I think, the classic example would be AI. Again, we can get quite quickly into a word soup environment where people are mixing up AI with artificial intelligence, with neural networks and deep learning and large language models, and so it goes on. We just need to, I think, get employees who weren't trained in technology when they left their academic institutions 10, 20 years ago to a position where they can ask intelligent questions of the technology, build the use cases that will be applied in the most ethical, the safest ways that will deliver advantage. And I think, Majid Al Futtaim have got quite a good example of this, in that they launched a training program where they were getting teams from technology units, from policy and delivery units, to really work together intensively, in scrums, call them what you want, using agile methodologies on projects, basically, so that both sides learn. The technologists learn about the policy customers' needs and requirements, and the policy customers learn how the technology operates to an appropriate degree and depth.
Sure. Thank you. So we have a question from Matar. Why does Dubai government not use an IAIDL program for employees? I think he's talking about the AI driving license. This is a program. Why is it not being used? I'm not sure if anyone has
Is that in the chat, Salwa?
Yeah, it was sent to me. No,
Ah,
private.
um,
I'm not
okay,
sure
yeah,
about this driving license, AI driving license. I have.
yeah. It's a bit too specific for me. Sorry.
Yeah, yeah. So another question that comes from Safia also, is there possibility to have HR analytics by AI? Sure. I think this is one of the main benefits of outputs of AI, pillars of AI, that you use it in analytics, predictions. I think it's a very strong use case.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Nada also clearly في الchat, Nada has shared the links for the two guides in Arabic and English. This is Safia's question we have answered. How about voice recognition? Sometimes AI does not understand voice. How AI going to respond? This is very technical.
So is that about someone saying that AI doesn't recognize their voice?
Voice, yeah.
I think the fact that when you develop a talent assessment, especially, you use massive amounts of data, it's unlikely that an AI is not going to understand somebody. Of course, if I tried to do an Arabic AI interview, I'd fail badly because I can't speak Arabic. So it's definitely not going to understand me. But I mean, generally, AI is pretty good at picking up patterns of communication. So unless someone really isn't speaking clearly, I don't think that would be a concern for a well-designed NLP-driven sort of like AI assessment. Because we have an example of one where we can assess people's English speech degree of adeptness. Let's put it that. And that's being used across the region here with no issues at all. So I don't think it's a concern, provided the data set is wide enough to make sure that it knows how different people may say certain words and in certain different ways, because there's always dialects, isn't there? Or what we call them is, in Britain we have different, I'm from Wales, I probably talk a little bit differently than Andrew would talk. I've got slight variations. AI can pick up on those things as long as you have a data set that covers that.
I think, I mean, maybe, and again, my points might be a bit more general, but I mean, I think about AI with regards to voice, and I'm thinking about tone and irony, and to go to a very English attribute compared to an American attribute, sarcasm. Now, I'm not saying I'd be sarcastic or ironic in a job interview, for example. That would be a silly tactic, but if you don't have an AI that can measure for that tone, that sort of linguistic facility to be sarcastic, and to say, yeah, I'm having a great day, which in English means actually I'm not having a very good day at all. Leave me alone. Then the AI is obviously going to fail a little bit. So I do worry sometimes about AI's ability to pick up on sentiments as expressed through tone and sarcasm. But I'm sure somebody much cleverer than me has it in hand.
But there has been as well some developments, I think, Andrew, on this point, that they're now studying emotional AI, right? So understanding the emotions as well. It's not only understanding the text. So I think, again, we know it's a science, it's evolving, and you don't know what's happening tomorrow. That's the whole point. But the most important thing is the guidelines. We have to keep the guidelines always updated, because every 5 days there'll be something new that we'll have to go and see how can we manage that.
Brilliant. So I think we are done with, there is one question, how we can make it ethical, ChatGPT in the educational context. I think this is a very big question. Education is the students are the main people who are benefiting from ChatGPT, I think, these days. It does everything for them.
Yeah, this is a bit of a tricky one to answer, really, isn't it? I mean, OpenAI, who are the company responsible for ChatGPT-3, I think they were indicating that in their broader set of AI tools, they've got a tool that recognizes that recognizes authoring by ChatGPT 3. This is part of the point with these generative adversarial models. You know, they can attack one another and find out one another's weaknesses and general attributes. But I mean, I think it's one of the weaknesses of ChatGPT 3 at the moment, compared to, let's say, a Google, is that ChatGPT 3 does not reveal its sources. It's a gigantic language learning model that grabs stuff from everything that's been written on a certain topic, or large amounts of words that have been written on a certain topic. And that obviously doesn't work for, you know, a nicely attributed, properly sourced university essay. So I think that's one of the apparent weaknesses of ChatGPT 3 at the moment, that means that it cannot be applied rigorously in an academic environment right now, in a way that, you know, your tutor, your professor would accept or wouldn't be able to see through.
So I think just one last question on, and then we can close the session. It's a general question. Are there any areas in human resources where you would consider the use of AI as off limits?
It's quite a controversial one, isn't it? I'm not sure I should answer that because we're recording.
Yeah. I think we can talk about, you know, the that will benefit from AI in the HR domain. That would make it more, you know, easy. Anyone would like?
I mean, you can use some humorous stuff here that would probably never happen. You wouldn't expect an AI to call somebody on Teams and say, by the way, you're fired. I'm joking, of course, here. So.
Yeah.
But you wouldn't expect AI to be involved in those really sensitive aspects. Or if the data may be used, but it wouldn't be the system or the robot or that would use. I'm sort of saying that half-heartedly or jokingly, but you know, you wouldn't include AI in making that decision and delivering the message. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
I wouldn't expect it. I hope I never.
To be honest, one of the good things about AI, if we see that, is for development purposes, right? Let's talk about the best side of it, right? I mean, currently, I'll be very honest, right? That when it comes to best practice, when it comes to development, right? We do assessments, but not every single customer or every single entity follow up with development. But if you can actually get the AI to start establishing scheduled interventions of development, or even automated feedbacks, or even, and if we can use something like ChatGPT to be starting to be like a cloud development agent for the employee, helping him, advising him, there will be lots and lots and lots of applications, right, that we can use OpenAI in conjunction with artificial intelligence and talent management. And you can build the whole story, by the way, right, around it. Even university students, right? I know that we are saying now AI can actually help them pass the bar and pass the exams for here and there, but he can actually, if you think about it, why can't we use it in a good way? Why can't they actually help them study well, understand, you know? So there's always like, we always try to find a way to break the technology, not how to actually use it to actually help us, right, in the beginning.
Yeah, I think my answer to the question, well, there's probably two answers, you know. The first one is the slippery, sneaky answer, which would be, actually, that's exactly why we have the guidelines and, you know, the things that we've been talking about today in place to decide where you should and shouldn't go with AI in the workplace. I think my more direct answer would be, and again, spoken as a non-professional, somebody who sits outside of the HR profession, I struggle with what I call AI for surveillance, which is one of those quite loaded words. When you have, let's say, for example, computer vision sort of monitoring an employee moving around the workplace or a warehouse, and you're trying to sort of feed that into a judgment of productivity or presenteeism, then I think it's you know, that's not for me, on the basis of my limited knowledge, a great place to be using AI, or a great way in which to be using AI.
Thank you, Andrew. I think with this we can close this session today. It was a very informative, very useful session. We've got a lot of insightful inputs during today's session from you, Andrew, from Mohammed, from David. I hope we can, inshallah, we will arrange for other sessions. As we just started launching this guide, we will have other sessions will be scheduled during the coming period, just to give extra information also about the guide. If anyone from the attendees أي حد عنده سؤال, please either you can share it via email through the HR Club team or to any of the attendees, and inshallah we will get back to you as soon as possible. As I said, the guides are on the website. Thank you all for attending. See you soon, inshallah, in the coming sessions. Thank you, and have a great month of innovation. Thank you.
Thank you all very much. Thank you.
مشكورين. مع السلامة.
شكرا. مع السلامة. مع السلامة.